They're not doing it.
This is a call to order for our workshop. We have roll call, please.
Yes, thank you. Vice Mayor Villanueva.
Here.
Councilmember Longabaugh.
Here.
Councilmember Alton.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
And Mayor Truitt is absent.
Thank you. If you want to go into item number 1.
Yes, thank you. Presentation and discussion regarding an informational overview of the City of Surprise Water Conservation and Water Qualities Program, and this will be Rich Williams, Water Services Director.
Good evening, Vice Mayor, Council members, City Manager Oliver. Tonight we have another installment about the water systems and the water issues within the arid Southwest. And tonight our Water Services Environmental Manager Christine Nunez will give you a presentation about conservation, water quality, and touch on some resources. And by the time we're done with these workshops over a period of time, we'll have given you a good representation of where we are, what we're doing, and you can tell us what policy issues you want us to pursue.
Thank you.
Good evening, Vice Mayor, Council members, City Management. Just going to do a brief overview of what the water resources, our conservation and quality. We've had a little bit of questions about, what our resources are and where we're going with them. The Integrated Water Master Plan will probably take you more into detail on that, so I'm just going to brief over that a little bit. The overview is again, Resources Water Conservation Program. Our programs and our plans align with the strategic plan, being environmentally conscious, sustainable, but we also are in line with the general plan. They kind of all go together, and what we do goes back to that and the reason that we have these programs established. Our water resources is what we're going to start with first. Currently, we're in the process of amending our Integrated Water Master Plan, as you know, and you're going to get more information on that and be asked to approve that eventually. One of my goals this year is to develop a 10-year water resource plan to figure out where we are now and where we should be in 10 years with how much water we have. I know that's a big question. How much water do we have and why do we keep building? This plan hopefully will guide us in the right direction. We're in the process of modifying our assured water supply designation. Every 10 years, you're given not given a designation, you have to apply and prove things up, and we're in the process of modifying that designation, and there's an item on the council agenda today for the city manager to get signatory authority for that application. And then regional water resource partnerships, we're really starting to establish ourselves as a city that's on the map with a lot of the various partnerships out there. Our current portfolio is we have the designation, and then we have a CAP allotment of 10,249 acre feet, which is equivalent to about 9 million gallons a day. Our non-potable, just based on our wastewater flow, is about 7 million gallons a day, and that is becoming an asset real quick with the water resources portfolios throughout the state. Our future is to get our a re-designation attained, find new water supplies. I'm currently on a group called the Add Water through the CAP program, and you can get on the CAP's website, cap-az.com, and look at the Add Water program, and it's trying to find out where new water sources are and how we can get them to the various users and share them appropriately. And then additional non-potable resources, not just effluent, but are there other raw waters or surface waters that we can tap into for using for non-drinking purposes. The use of water that we're looking at, the various types, and this again will come out in the Integrated Water Master Plan, is recharging our CAP allotment, getting credits for non-potable uses through giving the farmers, doing an exchange. If you give us credits, we give you water. And it's sort of a paper exchange, but at the same time, it's still keeping the water in our area of use. Non-potable for turf lands, for the areas that use a lot of water, but it doesn't have to be as high of quality as drinking requirements. And then researching other partnerships that can help us and that we can help and really become a part of planning the state water resources appropriately. Just a brief, paper water versus wet water. Paper water, as it's referred to, is just credits. We have sort of a bank with Department of Water Resources where we have credits, and we consider those paper water. We can put those credits to use various ways. And then there's the physical water, wet water availability. So we could have paper credits, but not necessarily wet water or vice versa. And we're trying to make sure our portfolio has both and can meet the demands both legally and physically. And then there's a 1,000-foot level requirement throughout the state where the groundwater cannot drop below 1,000 feet. That becomes an alert level for the state that we're hitting our point that we don't have enough water for the state's needs. Again, physical availability, legal availability, and then continuous availability. Those are the three requirements for our designation. We have to have those three requirements met. Our portfolio versus what's in the ground, paper water versus the wet water. The various elements of the water resources, again, are our water resources portfolio, as you can see, which goes down into conservation requirements, and then our water sources, which are drinking water, wastewater, and non-potable, and then that goes into recharge and or reuse. And they sort of make a circle of those are our resources, and we sort of try to make them all work together, which will lead into our conservation program. Basically, our program has these pieces and parts, or they're planned in the future, hopefully. The tiered water rates were adopted in December of '06 by our council. The good thing about those is they do get the users thinking about how they're using their water. We have had more interest in water audits since we've started those rates, inquiring on how they can reduce their water usages because of the cost. Water conservation ordinance was in July of '07. And then we're trying to increase some of these things. We want to incorporate new technologies. We want to educate and increase awareness, change the philosophy, change the thinking of people. And then other programs, incentive programs, possibly establishing new and beneficial partnerships that work both ways, and then help our current partnerships. How can we make them better and make them work for all of us? And then non-potable water irrigation. That's a very key part to our conservation program and to our water resources budget. Basically, why do we want to conserve water? We live in the desert. We don't have a lot of water available to us, as in some areas. And even when you do, it's not always the best quality. We want to be sustainable. We want to not just to meet our plans, but because it's the right thing to do. We have a lot of growth that we've hit lately, and trying to figure out where we're at is where, just getting back on our feet, dusting ourselves off and saying, okay, we have this growth, let's get our other things and make sure we're good with it. And then how to effectively and efficiently use the water, again, the cultural shift, the changing of the thought. Key areas are, education, again, technical assistance, water audits, what technologies are available and how we can save water throughout. People call us and ask us, how can I save water in my house? And we either give them an audit or we help them through what they have. Regulation and enforcement is very strong and getting stronger as we go. The regulators are getting harder on the cities, states, and anybody that's using water. How we plan and research, and then interaction between other agencies, other cities is really important, establishing those relationships. Our ordinance has enforcement, working with the various groups, not just HOAs, but that's part of it. Limitations on water features, including recirculation and how they build them and making sure that they're not spraying during windy parts to spray people or to more evaporation. Conservation based landscape requirements. CD is currently working on adopting a new landscape guideline. We're very, very involved in that and trying to include less water use, plants, reducing the plants, things like that, to make it just make sure our water is used better. And then non-residential landscape plans for commercial and industrial uses. Future, we're looking at, again, water conservation technologies, possibly allocations, because based on the water resources rules, for turf areas, they're only allowed a certain amount of water, and we and they are held liable for that, and they can enforce penalties upon us for that. Our water audit program, we actually are currently working on that and trying to establish a very good one that people will come to us and ask for help. And then future, possibly looking at turf not being in front yards and being just in backyards and active recreational areas, because that's where the beneficial use is. Uh-oh. Okay. Education categories. We work with the schools. We offer a lot of literature for anyone that's interested in it. We have booths at events and participate in various statewide events, not just here. And then classes and workshops. That's a fairly new thing in the last few years, and we've really got a lot of participation. I don't know if any of you know, but we have the Master Gardeners. We're hosting the Master Gardeners. It's a 17-week program this year, and that's really a good thing for Surprise. And then communications, working with our PIO and other partnership opportunities to broadcast how to save water. Our residential use, just so you know how conservation has come into play, if you look from June of 2005 to current, we have dropped on the average home from a little over 11,000 gallons per month to just below 9,000 gallons per month. This is based on our usage, actual usage and what we've served in homes. This is just a list of our current partnerships that we're involved in, and we're actually involved in a little more, but this is just a brief list of those. And here's some pictures of conservation technologies, from water recirculators, high-efficiency toilets. Believe it or not, that lady right in the middle, that's a high-efficiency toilet, or to the left there. And these are just some of the technologies that are available to us currently. And then our goals. We want to educate people. We want to get that cultural shift to make sure that people are thinking about it, especially in the schools, because it's a really interesting thing to see when your child comes home and says, hey, you need to turn that water off. And I've heard my son do it. And then achieving sustainability and having the appropriate funding, which is always, as you know, with our funding where we're at, a little bit tough sometimes. And plans and technologies and partnerships. Those are very important to how we do things with conservation. Now we'll go to water quality. I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the parameters of concern, not necessarily all of them, because there's a whole list of parameters. But for our usages, the main concern parameters, our priorities right now, are arsenic, nitrogen, and fluoride, because we have seen those in some of the wells, and we may end up having to treat for at least, well, we do know we have to treat for arsenic and possibly nitrogen and or fluoride at some point. The secondary considerations are total coliform, disinfection byproducts, lead, copper, long-term tools, and unregulated. The unregulated is still kind of iffy, but they're having a sample for unregulated contaminants to find out what's out there and what they may decide to regulate on. Arsenic, it's naturally in Arizona. It's not. It's throughout Arizona, just a natural occurring in the rock, in the soils. Federal standard is 10 parts per billion, and just so you know, that's roughly equivalent to a few drops of ink in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it's not a very high amount, and at 10 parts per million, it's not a significant or even really a health risk at that point. Currently, we're under an exemption. We just received notification today that we did get our exemption approved. We're planning on being in full compliance by December 2008. We have 4 systems currently going, 2 in operation and 2 under construction, with a capital cost of over $8 million, which, of course, as you know, you put in new technologies, you're going to have more operating costs. Fluoride, just so you know what it is, it's not necessarily a health concern except for very, very high levels. It's more of an aesthetic thing where the modeling brown teeth, the primary drinking water standard is 4 parts per million, not billion. But then they have a secondary standard, meaning anything over 2 you have to do notifications and does require letting people know that you're over that standard. But then at the same time, we all know fluoride's good for us, so at less than 1.7, it's actually good for your teeth. We are in compliance with the federal standards. Our standard, the city standard, is the secondary standard of 2 parts per million. And we try not to treat if preferable. We try to blend it out so that we do meet the under 2, so that there are still some health benefits for it. And then the secondary would be to do treatment if we had to. Nitrogen, nitrogen is an acute parameter versus the other two that are more, they can cause issues over time. Nitrogen can cause issues immediately if it's at certain levels. The federal standard's 10 ppm. Blue baby syndrome, basically your body prefers nitrogen over oxygen, so if you have nitrogen, it's going to go for the nitrogen and your body's going to starve of oxygen. So that's what nitrogen can do to you, and some of the sources here are listed. Fertilizers, septic tanks, and it's naturally in the soil as well. Again, we're meeting the federal standards, and the same with fluoride. You know, our city standard is 7 parts per million, which is 30% of the primary standard, and that's just a calculated value that we came out that makes sense and that's achievable. Again, blending is a priority and treatment is secondary. Other parameters of concern, the other ones that were involved, you know, basically you just have a better groundwater quality, or we have better groundwater quality, so a lot of those other parameters aren't a concern for us. Groundwater, or our groundwater, is actually a very good quality. We meet the standards, we perform all the necessary sampling, and we actually just received a reduction in sampling for some of those parameters because our water is good. Went over the water resources conservation and water quality. We're going to be coming back to you tonight, one on consent for the signatory authority for the city manager. That's just an administrative process to have the manager have the ability to sign the application when it's ready. And then the drought plan, I'll come back to you on a presentation on where we are on a drought preparedness plan.
Any questions? Yes, John.
Vice Mayor. Christine, one of the things you mentioned early on was banking of water, what you call the paper water.
Mm-hmm.
Is that long-term or is that annual, or how do we bank it if we don't use our cap or other water sources?
There's actually 3 areas. One of them is our assured account, which we have quite a few credits in right now. And then we have an annual, and then we also have a long-term. The annual and the long-term are banks that we use every year. To get into our assured account, we have to go through the CAGRD, through our agreement with CAGRD, and we have to pay them 65% before we can pull the other 35% out of our account. It's a really complex
You don't want to do it if you don't have to.
Not out of your assured, but your long-term and your annual are almost, as I refer to them, as your checking and savings account. You want to put as much in there to use as you need it. And the annual is a rolling. The good thing about putting everything as much as you can and keep it in annual, you have to put it in the ground and use it within that year, within 12 months. If you do that, it's not considered groundwater. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's not considered groundwater. So it doesn't matter where we put it in the state. It's not technically considered groundwater and doesn't go against our groundwater account. But the long-term that becomes kind of a wet water account.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair.
Richard?
Christina, as we go forward and we get more and more businesses that come in and doing business with the city, and they're occupying land, they're processing raw materials, making it into a finished product, what are we going to put in place to monitor the effluent that comes from their manufacturing? Do we have a game plan going forward as to how this is going to be monitored? Or I'm sure we care. But how do we follow up on that?
That actually is a pretreatment program under the federal laws. EPA has a pretreatment program requirement for certain. You have to have a certain volume as well as so many industries, which we currently are in a gray area with that. We don't have the industry yet, but once we do get them, we're required by law to have a pretreatment program, and then from that point it establishes a permitting requirement, enforcement requirements, funding requirements. That's a federally mandated program.
Right. Does the economic development people know what these programs are?
They don't. They usually come to us, though, and talk to us about them, and we...
That's why I go after a piece of business that, yes, sir.
Yeah, we are working with a firm right now that the Water Services Division has been very instrumental in working with, that would use a large amount of water, but it is what I call a relatively green project, in that we would be giving them reclaimed water treated by the wastewater treatment plant. So, we're very cognizant of that aspect of it. Plus, we've also looked at what their loading is for their discharge, and they've looked at what the chemistry is for the reclaimed water we would provide them. So I think everybody's very cognizant of what the rules are.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, just so you know, also, we would establish a permitting and sampling program for those users to make sure they're monitored on a regular basis and they don't have an impact.
And who does that? You folks monitor, or does EPA come in and monitor it?
No, we're required to.
You? Okay.
On the 100-year supply, is that the developer that has to assure that, or does the city has to want to develop?
The city does. That's what the assured designation is we basically true up and say we have 100 years of supply, and again, they look at the physical, the legal, and the continuous availability. So DWR has a model that they're working on, and they have quite a few cities that are putting in for their redesignation, and they're going to put all these values in there and crunch it together and just see how it works out. So it's a modeling thing and also a legal process.
Vice Mayor, if I could just add to that, that's with under the city's designation as the assured water provider. There are ways for individual projects to go out and obtain certificates of assured water. They go out on their own, they prove it up, or they bring in additional resources. That is another option also.
Well, this is a follow-up. Most of the time, do the developers do that, or is the city doing it as a standard thing?
To date, the majority of the time, since we have the assured water supply, that's an advantage for us as long as we make wise choices and we manage our water resources well. That's actually an attractive option for coming to the city of Surprise rather than going to another location that they have to bring the water assurance to.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Discussions? I want to thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Item number 2.
Thank you. Presentation and discussion regarding implementing a cost-saving home-based supervised detention program. This will be Judge George Logan.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, members of
Good
the
afternoon.
council. Do we have our program on this?
Come in and pull up your presentation earlier.
No, I didn't. No. I'm sorry. Is it loaded already? No. Sorry.
Thank goodness. We're going to be, oh my God, I can't make my spiel. I don't have something to talk off. Every department, you know.
Just click on the slides and move it.
Slideshow.
Well, then I'll make it automatic, right? Thank you. What I would like to discuss with you today is a proposal for a home detention program. And our outline for the discussion will address the current status of the law, how home detention works, then we'll move to cost implications, eligibility of participants in the program, what are the benefits to the city, and what is our next step. Currently, for fiscal year 0809, we have an $800,000 budget for jail services. This budget is in the general fund. Jail services are contracted with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. and they have established fees, jail fee days that we pay for each prisoner that is housed. The initial processing fee is $199.35, and the daily housing fee is $73.46 per day. There's a little unknown factor here. This is adjusted annually by the sheriff based on the sheriff's costs and imposed back, and it is imposed back upon the cities. We don't have a negotiating voice in this. Also, although not shown on this screen, the sheriff gives a discount for people who are sentenced on second offenses DUIs. Basically, these fees are cut in half. Don't ask me why, but it's like frequent flyer miles. They claim they need more money, but you get frequent flyer discounts. The state mandated minimum sentencing is the major factor here. Effective September 26th of this year, the state legislature passed mandated DUI jail sentencing. What it does is it eliminates the judicial discretion for judges to suspend any jail sentences with regard to DUI sentences on extreme and super extreme charges. Up until the 26th of September, judges have the discretion to suspend portions of the sentence of a minimum mandatory sentence. After the 26th, we do not. So what that means is on a regular DUI, it's 10 days jail with 9 days suspended. They did not change that. But on the extreme DUI, it used to be, or it still is until the 26th, it is a 30-day sentence with 20 days suspended, thereby leaving a 10-day mandated sentence. This was an incentive to people to complete a counseling program, an alcohol counseling program. The legislature has decided that that's no longer a mode that they wish to proceed, so therefore it will be a 30-day straight sentence. Also, on the super extreme, it'll be 45 days as a minimum mandatory sentence for the initial offense. If you get hit with a super extreme on a second offense, it goes to 120 days with 60 days suspended, thereby leaving 60 days mandated. And on the super extreme second offense, it's 180 straight days. There is an alternative to this, because the cities more than likely bear the cost of this incarceration simply because most of the people are indigent or near indigent. And if they're not indigent when they start, they lose their job because of the conviction and the jail requirements, and therefore the cost falls back upon the cities. The alternative to this incarceration is under ARS 9-49907A. Basically allows for home detention, which means that eligible, thereby selected defendants can be sentenced to serve a portion of their sentence under home detention. By suitable, we mean that they are nonviolent. That's the principal factor to consider. And this is treated the same as jail confinement. The way the process works is as follows. The court sentences the defendant. There is a financial screening process that takes place following sentencing, whereby we can determine assets and also income and make a determination as to whether a defendant is eligible or not for any kind of relief. If they're referred for home detention, we send them to a service provider who is under contract to the court, to the city. And that service provider then installs a monitoring device. And it will provide for alcohol monitoring and drug monitoring, and for an additional cost, GPS monitoring. The monitoring tracks the defendant's time leaving and returning to home. We usually allow defendants to work. We're not trying to destroy their economic base. We're not trying to destroy the family. We want to correct bad behavior. So if a person is employed, they will be allowed to leave home and go to work. We also allow them to go to school or to go to church or to a special event with permission from the court, such as a funeral if that occurs. That is also permitted now, even though someone is incarcerated with the sheriff's office. They do have work release programs, and this is not really a variation from that. The work release and monitoring and home detention is monitored 24/7 by a central monitoring staff. They report to our agent any non-compliance that occurs. So if someone was scheduled to return at 6 o'clock p.m. following a workday and they didn't get back to 7 p.m., that's monitored and it's reported as non-compliance. The court then has the ability to issue an order to show cause and demand that the defendant report to court and show satisfactory explanation as to why they were non-compliant. And if there's not a satisfactory answer, then the court can revoke, and the defendant would be sentenced to spend the rest of the time in jail or a portion thereof. The alcohol monitoring is conducted through a sobriety. That's basically like a breathalyzer. They're used by the police when individuals are stopped, and you can see them, they blow into the device along the side of the road, or they're taken into custody and there's a breathalyzer used for testing breath. It's calibrated to the defendant's voice. That is, it's a voice ID. Before the sobriety is installed, they have to go through a check, a voice print is established, and if anyone other than their voice is employed to activate the alcohol monitoring device, the sobriety, it's recognized and it's invalid. And random testing is imposed through the central monitoring process. They just schedule periodic checks during the day as to determine whether or not the defendant has been consuming alcohol. If they do determine that he or she has consumed alcohol, that's considered non-compliant. And again, defendant can be violated, and the work release can be revoked, or the home detention can be revoked. What is the average cost? $15 per day, and it includes both alcohol and drug testing, which is done through UA, urinalysis, and the electronic monitoring. The cost of the program is paid for by the defendant, if the defendant is financially able. In the instances where a defendant is indigent, then the city would be required to pay the cost. And you say, well, why would the city want to pay this cost? Well, the fact is it's far more economical for the city to pay $9 a day, which we anticipate would be the contract fee for us, as opposed to paying $73 a day to the sheriff to monitor someone. I need to include one other factor. There is a mandatory requirement under state statute that anyone who is sentenced for DUI and cannot be eligible for the home detention program until they serve the first 15 days in jail. So it's only after you serve the first 15 days in jail that you then would be eligible for home detention. What kind of savings were realized? Glendale initiated this program last year, and they estimated that they saved over $91,000 in an 8-month period on jail fees. How is that savings realized? This chart is a little bit technical, but let me just kind of run through it quickly. If you look at the first line, the standard DUI charge has a mandated 1-day jail sentence. That costs $199.35 because that's the 1-day booking fee. And then if you have a DUI with a prior, you have a mandated 60-day jail sentence. The straight jail cost on that is $2,266.75. With home detention, those costs dropped to $1,288 for a realized savings of $978.85. The big savings come in on the extreme DUI because there you have a mandated 30 days initially, and again the jail costs without home detention $23.29, with home detention $14.44, savings of $8.85. You have to remember that the home detention does include the first 15 days at their standard jail rate. If you look at the last line, I'm just going to skip down to the super extreme DUI. First offense, mandated 45 days. Straight jail costs, again, are $3,431, with home detention $1,669. And if you have a second offense extreme, you're looking at 180 days straight time. And when you do the math, the savings comes out to be $3,585. The reason why it's not greater than that is, again, because second offenders are given a reduced rate by the sheriff. Who is eligible? The person must not be perceived as a risk to themselves or to the community. So we're looking at people who are emotionally and mentally stable. They may have a drinking problem, but they don't have other problems. And we also look at their past criminal history record. So if they have an assault or a DV assault or some such past history, that would disqualify them. Secondly, they must be recommended by the prosecutor to join the program. And then lastly, they must be approved by the sentencing judge to be eligible. And again, in order not to give the appearance of being discriminatory, we do want to make sure that the program is available for those persons who are indigent. And that is why we do recommend that the city pick up the cost, so it doesn't look like it's just for those who are wealthy, just for those who can afford to pay. The benefits. Costs are shifted from the city to the defendant for those defendants that can pay. There's no cost to the city at this point. It allows eligible participants to maintain work, family, and community ties. They can still have family contact, of course. They will still be able to work and maintain their job. And they will also be able to do community restitution work. That is volunteer service. Most of the sentences involve some kind of community restitution. They work at the food bank, or they work for the Salvation Army or a thrift store or some such organization where they get, where the community benefits from this service. And it reduces jail overcrowding, and it imposes a suitable punishment. Our next step. If the council believes that this is an acceptable way to proceed, we would introduce a resolution for adoption on September the 11th at the council meeting. We would then move forward to contract for monitoring services, and at that point we could implement the program and track the results.
Questions?
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
Judge Logan, thank you very much for that presentation. I do have a question as to the success of other programs in other cities. Is there any proven records out there that this, in fact, works, or 50% of them have no regard to the terms of this home arrest? Or
in talking to the possible or potential service provider that we discussed this with, it's a high rate of success. People would rather be at home than be in jail. I mean, that's a strong motivating factor. Of course, and maintaining family connection. The problem comes in with people who are serious alcoholics and they can't stop drinking. Then they end up in a violation. They end up being non-compliant, and they get revoked.
is there an is there an option for getting some help, medical help, or any program at the same time as being in home arrest?
Yes.
And do you offer that as a service, or do you recommend that, or you mandate that?
It's mandated by statute that the court impose a screening and treatment program. We sentence defendants to complete such a screening and treatment program. Usually the provider, after they do their screening, can determine the level of dependency that is revealed, and they adjust their program according. They go to counseling sessions and get medical help if necessary.
Does the service company, the vendor that provides the service for you, are they on a contract per client, per user of this service, or are they on a contract with the city? And then going one more step is that if we have somebody that has 60 days worth of monitoring, and we sign them up for 60 minus 15 days, right? And they abuse it, and they go back in 10 days after that. Are we still obligated to pay the whole 45 days that is left?
No. The simple answer is no. The contract is with the city to provide the services for as long as the defendant is in the program. If the defendant drops out of the program, there's no further cost to the city to the provider, but we then pay to Sheriff Joe.
Okay.
We have to pay the jail fee.
So have you estimated, my last question is, have you estimated how much it's going to cost the city in addition to what you identified, and also the phone calls that you're going to be getting asking for an exemption, or for somebody has to work late, do you have staff available to answer those calls in a timely manner?
Okay, those calls would not come to the court directly. Any adjustments in, say, work hours that would require an adjustment in a monitoring and tracking would go to the provider. They have a central monitoring facility, and they would be the contact for a person who, for instance, maybe had a car accident or a breakdown and did not get back in time. So we're not dealing with those. And we would work with the provider to determine the parameters that we would allow before someone is brought in, and we then review them for revocation. I could not give you, we have struggled to tell you how much the city could save on this or how much it would cost the city. We know it's going to be substantially less. Glendale, I think, is an excellent example of what they came up with. But the way we track our sentencing, it's difficult because many times persons are charged with an extreme, but they plead to a lower offense. And it looks like they are being sentenced on a higher offense, but they're really being sentenced on a lower offense. But estimating that last year we had 74 cases of extreme DUI. Using that number just as a base number without any increase, assuming that that's 30 days mandatory jail at a minimum, we estimated a savings of $69,700 just on the extreme DUI over 74 cases.
We only have time for a couple more questions. We have a CDF meeting at 5:45. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. The workshop is adjourned.